Thank you so much for joining us on our very first This Is Now Live. We know how many things there are to attend these days. We know you're on a lot of Zoom things for work, so we really appreciate you spending your next hour with us. As you can see, I'm coming to you from my guest room. Many of you are probably in your homes too. Very few of you are in your offices. Maybe it's nice enough where you are where you can be outside. One thing is definitely certain, which is that our lives look a lot different than they did 10 weeks ago. That can be really destabilizing. That can kind of create a lot of fear. And fear can really grow if you feed it. And we think that the best way to starve fear is with good information. And that's true when we're talking about COVID-19. That's true when we're talking about sustainability. That's true when we're talking about impact to the planet. So it's true with anything we don't understand. And so we at BPCM have created This Is Now Live as a way to spread good information, as a way to dispel fear. We want to talk to experts about all sorts of topics. At BPCM, we're very interested in sustainability, but that won't be the only thing we'll talk about in future talks. And we are hoping that this is a resource for you and that you find this useful. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Carrie Ellen Phillips. I'm one of the founding partners of BPCM, which is a communications agency. And at BPCM, we've been passionate about sustainability for most of the last decade. And it's confusing out there, but when we started our journey, there wasn't much information. We had to go to experts to get answers to our questions. That was really the only way to do it. And now everybody on social media seems to be an expert. So there's a lot of information flying around. Some of it's true, some of it's partially true, and some of it is a little bit misguided. So what we want to do is cut through all of that. Since you are bombarded with information, what we want to do is talk to people who are experts in their field or who are putting this into practice in their companies. Today, what we're going to do is talk with the Ellen MacArthur Foundation. Ellen MacArthur is a real person. I'll let our friend Francois Souchet from the Ellen MacArthur Foundation talk a little bit about her. The first time I saw Ellen speak about the circular economy was at the Copenhagen Fashion Summit several years ago. She's an incredibly inspiring woman. If you haven't seen her TED Talk, you should. And she lays out an incredible business case for the circular economy, and that by reusing our resources and being better stewards of our resources, we can actually create better businesses and a significant impact positively for the planet. What we want to do today is talk to you about the circular economy, and our intention is that you leave here today with an understanding of what the circular economy is, how it relates to fashion, and how businesses can apply those elements of the circular economy and lessen their planetary impacts and improve their businesses. After the conference, you're going to receive some takeaways so that you don't have to be sitting here taking notes and you can just be present with us. You'll receive facts about the circular economy. You'll receive a recording of what we saw today. You'll also get links to different things from the Ellen MacArthur Foundation that will help you in that search for good information. I'm going to invite my good friend Francois Souchet from the Ellen MacArthur Foundation to join us. He is our host today, and he leads the Make Fashion Circular initiative, which is a big proponent for the circular economy in fashion. I have learned a lot from him in the time that I have known him. Francois, welcome. He's joining us from France.
Hey, Carrie, good to be here.
Are you there? Hi. So, Francois, let's get right into it. Can you tell us a little bit about who is Ellen MacArthur And what does the Ellen MacArthur Foundation do?
So Ellen MacArthur was a professional sailor in the first part of her career, and she was the fastest person to navigate around the globe in 2005. So she was record holder for that. And when she was sailing around the world, she basically had to pack a very finite amount of resources to go through that world tour, because every additional kilo slows you down. So she experienced firsthand what it meant to have finite resources. And when she came back on shore through conversation with her sponsors and a number of other actors, she realized that the world was no different. However, the way we were managing resources was if they were infinite. And that's what spun our idea to start the Ellen MacArthur Foundation and to advocate for a circular economy.
And so you guys don't just work on fashion. Can you talk about some of the other things that the foundation does?
Absolutely. So the Ellen MacArthur Foundation was started in 2010 with the mission to accelerate the transition to a circular economy. So we work across industries. We've got programs that range like cross industry to like very focused one on plastics, fashion, and food. And our work is really to convene and actors and stimulate action from actors across value chains, across sectors, to really move the world closer to a circular economy. And in the 10 years we've been operating, we've, for example, managed to get over 600 companies in the plastic space to align and rally behind a shared vision for a plastic system that would eliminate waste from the outset, and a shared set of redesign principles. We've also been informing the work of policymakers, for example, at the European Commission, on circular economy plans.
That's so exciting what you've been doing. Can you talk about the circular economy as it relates to fashion?
Yeah, so the way we see a circular economy at the foundation is relying on three principles. The first one is to design out waste and pollution. Put simply, it just means broaden the design brief, think broader about like the implications of making a product, how it will be made, what it can become, how it will be used. The second principle of a circular economy is to keep products and materials in use. It's basically mean value more. How can you create more opportunities with what's already there? And this is the principle that really creates most of the economic opportunity of a circular economy. And the final principle is to regenerate natural systems, which basically means leave the place in a as good or better condition that you found it. If you need to grow something, make sure that your agricultural practices ensure that you can grow it over and over and over again without destroying the soil.
Let's talk about the problem of waste in fashion.
The fashion industry is extremely wasteful. I mean, when you look at the current flow of material within the industry, so how materials are being used in the industry today, most of it will end up in a landfill or being incinerated. And if you think about like the rate at which the industry is generating waste, it's the equivalent of a truckload filled with clothes that ends up in a landfill incineration every second. So it's generating waste very quickly. And if you think about like that waste generation, 12% of the materials that are used by the industry will be wasted before the garments even get sold. So like through the manufacturing processes, through like everything that's being unsold, 12% of the materials will be wasted. So the fashion industry is one of the most polluting out there. And I think that there's been like a few myths. So it's never been proven that it is the second most polluting. But through our analysis, what we saw is actually the emission of the fashion industry are equivalent to the emissions that are being created every year by all the commercial flights and all the container ships globally.
So this is something I want to point out. There was what Francois was referring to is that there was something that went out and kind of went viral on the internet, and it affected a lot of us. I think it spurred a lot of us into action, that fashion was the second most polluting industry after oil and gas. It's a harrowing thing to say. The problem is it's just not factually provable. So what again, for us, it's really important to spread good information. And so what Francois is saying about fashion creating more carbon emissions than commercial shipping and flights, that is a true statement that is provable. So let's talk about that value loss, that impact of clothing keeping things in use longer.
Yeah. So when you think about like the way we produce and use clothing between 2000 and 2015, I need to stop saying like over the past 15 years because the world is moving on. Between 2000 and 2015, basically the amount of clothing that is being produced every year has doubled. But in the same time, the number of times we wear this clothing has decreased by close to 40%. So we wear things less and less, and we make more and more. And actually what that results in is a massive missed opportunity for the fashion industry. Through like clothing that is not being worn as much as it's good, we estimated that the industry is missing out on around $400 billion a year. And if you add that to the materials that are being sent to landfill that could potentially be recycled into new clothing, you add another 100 billion to that. So it's basically $500 billion a year that the industry is missing out on through like underutilization and waste.
It's crazy. It doesn't make any business sense. So what we want to do, what Francois and I agreed we want to do is bring you companies who are showing that you can put the circular economy into practice. We sometimes, I think incorrectly that it's just big companies that are doing it. So the first people we want to bring out Stuart Ahlum from doesnt. Stuart's joining us from California. He and his partner, Chloe, had experience in the footwear supply chain and realized that they could do something different by applying the principles of the circular economy. And they set out to create a white sneaker built to never end up in a landfill because it is built for disassembly. So welcome, Stuart. Nice to see you. So Stuart, let's just go straight to it. Let's talk about white sneakers. Why white sneakers?
Sneakers, especially white sneakers, are the perfect product to put on a closed loop system. So we talk about footwear and sneakers in particular as being a high frequency basic. So it's a product that is worn incredibly frequently. The first user is often the last user. And they kind of frame this up. 97% of sneakers end up in landfill. Of like landfill waste, 17% is textile waste. And footwear is disproportionately wasteful. So it accounts for only 10% of production, but 25% of the waste in landfill. And again, it's really hard for footwear to have a second life. If it smells at all, if it's worn down slightly, it becomes really difficult to donate. And those products, often like 85% of donated shoes go straight to landfill anyway. And then it also makes it really hard to recycle. There's so many different component parts in it. So again, it's the perfect product that people are wearing really hard, 10,000 steps a day. They're buying 2 to 6 pairs a year and replacing them really frequently. So there's really no good option for your old shoes. And most of the time they sit in the back of your closet and you wear like your 4 favorites and your other 20 pairs sit in the back that you swear you're going to wear on a rainy day and you never do. So circularity in the circular economy is a perfect solution for that.
And so when you went to go try to build a white sneaker that could be could be recycled, that could be disassembled, how did you go about that from like a material standpoint? We hear a lot about circular materials, regenerative materials, bio-based materials. So talk to us about what's typically in a sneaker and then what you chose to use in a sneaker.
Yeah, really good question. So the 3 main component parts in like traditional footwear, are like not really easily recycled, and B, they're really bad actors when they get into a landfill. So it's leather, it's synthetic rubber, and it's virgin plastic. So in a landfill condition, those things don't break down. They take anywhere from 80 to 1,000 years to break down in landfill. And when they do, you get microplastic pollution, you get runoff from some of the chromium with like the treating of that. And so we had to walk away from those traditional textiles. And our big focus was on recyclability. So how easy could it be recycled? It was also on whether or not the product was at scale. We wanted to do this in a large volume, and we didn't want to just be able to make like 100 or 1,000. And then with that also comes price. We wanted to make sure that this was attainable, this was affordable, and so we're trying to price our shoes around $100. And then there was durability and all of the other things that kind of go with that. Is Is it aesthetically pleasing? And so that was kind of how we triangulated on it. And we brought a bunch of different partners into the mix pretty early on. So we didn't design this or source these materials in a vacuum. We worked really closely with our recycling and textile recycling partners to figure out exactly what materials we could recycle, and realizing that the recycling system was going to be like the least pliable part of the supply chain. So we wanted to design and source products that could easily be mechanically recycled, which is your kind of like your polyesters and plastics, it's your cottons, and it's your rubbers. And so those were kind of the materials that we ended up sourcing and kind of triangulating on.
Awesome. So talk to me about why a teeny tiny company, Thousand Bell launched last year, is able to do this. Talk to me about some of the reasons that larger companies have a harder time shifting this way.
Yeah, that's a really good
question. You've
question.
worked in large companies, so I think it would be good for you to give a perspective on that.
Yeah, that's a great question. It's something that everybody's talking about, and so you're seeing some of the bigger footwear partners at least talking about it, which I think is incredibly like valuable. They've got a pretty big platform, so it's exciting that it's a topic of conversation. What makes it difficult is that supply chains just traditionally, when you get at scale, are not very nimble, and so these larger companies have made material and even fiber commitments 5 to 10 years out. Really hard to walk away from, and hard to kind of nimbly move the supply chain forward. So they might be able to launch, a couple pairs of shoes like this, but to move, 100, 200 product lines is incredibly difficult. And then the other thing is cost. So when you're making millions of pairs of shoes and there's a bottom line, and you're reporting out to the street if you're a publicly traded company, 30 to 90 cents of material innovation and upscale, makes a big difference when your programs are millions and millions of pairs. And so oftentimes the first thing that's cut are the material innovation. And so it's really hard to kind of steer these big ships and move them forward. But what was really exciting for us when we started this is that the material innovations out there, people are doing some really exciting things on the textile front, to make not only product recyclable, but to like really cut down on waste. And then the recycling is there. And really it's interesting. We've talked to our recycling partners, pretty frequently, and kind of the underlying message there is that anything is recyclable, you just got to get it up to scale. And so kind of with those two things in mind, we were really able to build a product that was recyclable. And I think that bigger companies are heading in that direction, but it's going to, again, take 5, 10, 15 years.
Thank you for that. That's really good insight. All right, I'm going to come back to Francois and talk about kind of what Stuart's been talking about, which is designing out waste. And Francois, I'd love for you to talk about exactly what that means when we're talking about the circular economy and fashion.
Yeah, I think Stuart touched upon a lot of those points, and it's really great to see that alignment. When you want to design out waste, you need to basically involve quite a number of people in the creation of the product in order to really understand how things will work. So, for example, we focused on jeans. So Stuart looked at footwear. We focused on jeans and said, how can we make jeans that are fit for a circular economy today? And so we involved over 80 experts from across the industry and said, well, what could be done so that jeans can be circular at your level? How could it work at your level? And if we think about like when jeans stop being used, what prevents materials from being recycled today, and what would improve that system? And what we felt was actually thinking about the disassembly of the product is critical, and thinking about how can it be very quickly disassembled, because the last part of the value chain, like when you collect things and recycle it, there's very little margin and money to be done there. So that they're operating on very, very thin margins. You need to make sure that everything is as streamlined as it could be. So for jeans, that could mean limiting the number of rivets, making like buttons and like leather patches that are super easy to remove, so that then all the materials can go towards recycling.
It's super interesting because in the same way that you were talking about plastics, it seems as though you've been able to gather quite a lot of big actors together to kind of really commit to this problem and to an end and to a solution and some timing?
Yeah, well, jeans is a very interesting product to look into. It's ubiquitous. Like virtually everyone has a pair of jeans. We estimated that over 2 to 3 billion pairs of jeans are manufactured every year, and in addition, it's a highly polluting product to make. Cotton takes a lot of water. You need a lot of dyeing, finishing to make the jeans as you get them in the shops. But what's great is that the industry had realized how polluting it was, and that started to take like tremendous action to reduce that. So when we looked at denim, there was a massive like history to build upon and to say, okay, if we really want to bring it to the next level, if we really want to bring like circular economy into that conversation, what would it take? And so what it led us towards is kind of creating guidelines alongside 4 criteria: durability, having a conversation about how can we measure durability, how can we have a sort of unified way of thinking about how do we assess that a product is durable, and also how can we demystify a little bit the product care and explain in like plain English how to best care for a product so that when people have this pair of jeans, they can keep it forever. The second aspect is materials health. We talk about the importance of regenerating natural systems. And when we talk about materials health, it's making sure that the cotton is organic in the jeans, that the jeans don't use hazardous chemicals when they're made, that they don't use hazardous finishes to like make them look a bit distressed. And
Francois, can you just quickly talk about why organic cotton is so important for you guys in that versus a conventional cotton?
Yeah, so when you compare the two, like conventional cotton takes a lot of pesticides and fertilizers to grow. And that's nasty, not only for the soil on which you grow the cotton, but it's also extremely dangerous for the cotton grower. So if you move towards organic cotton, not only do you rebuild the soil on which it's being grown, but also you protect the health of the cotton grower. And then the recyclability, making sure that, as we said, the jeans can be recycled. And finally, the traceability, which is super important to make sure that those jeans can be identified and everyone can understand that those jeans were made in a different way from the classic pair of jeans.
Yeah, I think we have a slide about how many organizations the Ellen MacArthur Foundation is now working with on jeans redesign. I think it's, if I'm correct, it's 50 organizations,
yep,
which accounts for 650,000 pairs of jeans set to these standards by May of 2021.
Yeah. So the jeans redesign was very much like, from our perspective, a starting point into thinking differently about how we can make product for a circular economy, and testing with a number of like brands, manufacturers, mills, and others. How could we translate that into practical action? So we put quite a short timeline to it, like the jeans need to be on the market virtually now, so that we can learn very quickly from this project. And today we're very excited that we have like over 50 organizations, some of them like very large and famous denim makers, who have taken upon this challenge and who have like created different jeans for that.
Well, I think that's the perfect segue to our next panelist, who joins us from The Gap. This is Rebecca Golden. She is the Director of Denim Research and Development at The Gap, who make a lot of the jeans that a lot of people watching this might be wearing right now. Rebecca has a career's worth of denim expertise. She's worked at Ralph Lauren, Levi's. You've probably worn products that she has had a hand in making over the years. So Rebecca, thank you so much and welcome. I think you're joining us from New Jersey.
Yes, I am. Thank you for having me. Good to be here.
So can we talk about, I want to talk about scale. Can we talk about how much, I just want to give people an idea of The Gap clothes the entire world. So can you give us a sense of scale for how much denim The Gap makes in a year?
Yes, across all of the Gap brands, not in Gap Incorporated, we use 110 million yards of denim annually.
Wow. Wow, wow, wow. I think we've got another slide here about just your holiday assortment. How many pairs of jeans and...
So beginning in holiday of 2019, we the company had undertaken an initiative to use a minimum of 5% recycled post-consumer waste cotton in all of our denim fabrics. That cotton comes from old jeans that would have otherwise gone to landfill. They are shredded and turned back into fiber, and then that cotton is blended with the conventional cotton, and it kind of invisibly shows up in a new pair of jeans. So it's old jeans in new jeans. Our impact, our savings for holiday, just for one season for holiday 19, we made 975,000 pairs of jeans, and utilizing the 5% post-consumer waste cotton, which equates to over 90,000 pounds of recycled cotton within those 975,000 jeans. So
I think that's such a good example. Sorry, I think it's such a good example of how much scale shifting something, when you have as much scale as the Gap has, even by 5%, that you can really start to make a dent in your impact. For the jeans redesign program, which you've been working on, I think the material choice needed to be 98% cotton, but the other 2% were up to you. What did you decide to use, and how did you make that decision?
Yeah, so it's actually 98% organic cotton, but we could also use a percentage of post-consumer waste cotton as well, which ties in beautifully to the initiative that we already had in place to use post-consumer waste cotton in our denim. That 2% other was, we talked about that a lot.
Can you give people an idea of what is typically in denim? Like what, why that would be a big conversation?
Yeah, I mean, most typically that blend of 98% and 2% would be 98% conventional cotton and 2% elastane or spandex, a stretch fiber. We had a lot of good meetings about what to do with that 98 too, and talked about it in ways that we really kind of wouldn't normally talk about it. We spent a lot of time. We did a lot of research. What are our options? What could that 2% be? What should it be? Ultimately, even though fiber is our starting point when we're creating something new, ultimately the circularity drove us to think about the end before we made decisions about the beginning. So in terms of what to do with that 2%, what really drove our thinking was, will this jean be recyclable at the end of its life? And how do we make it recyclable when we're choosing our fiber mix of 98 too?
So I want to ask you one more question, is because you have such a breadth of knowledge over what denim has looked like for such a long time. Give us an idea of the landscape of, it seems like you've been able to make a lot of choices about using recycled materials. What does that look like now versus what it looked like even 5-10 years ago? Do you have the same choices? Do you have better choices? Or what about prices?
Yeah, we have much, much better choices today than we had 10 or 15 years ago. I would say the industry in the past 5 years driving towards sustainability and circularity, the past 5 years have made amazing strides in terms of creating more opportunities and more options for designers and developers to choose from. 10 or 15 years ago, there were leaders in the industry who were talking about eco-friendly or green jeans, and they were interesting to us in the industry, but they were difficult to find manufacturers for. They were expensive, very expensive, and to be honest, they didn't look that great. But the industry has persevered, and they have continued to drive toward making decisions and using technology, new equipment, new dyeing methods, new fibers, new chemicals to continuously over those 15 years expand the menus and give us many, many more choices. Our conversations with our vendors have really changed over that time as well. You know, we used to go in looking at fabrics and saying, you know, what does it feel like? What's the color? How heavy is it? And how much does it cost? And now we sit down at the table with our suppliers and we say, what's good about it? What are we saving? Does it save water? Does it save chemicals? Can we add post-consumer waste cotton into it? What are the other fiber choices that we can make that are better and that will make it more sustainable and more circular? It's changed dramatically in the past 5 years.
Amazing. Thank you so much. So Francois, let's talk some more about, this is a good segue into more regenerative materials. Let's talk about why regenerative materials are so important for a circular economy. We hear a lot about it from a sustainability point of view, from a circularity point of view. Why is regenerative material so important?
If you think about the three principles of circular economy, like the regeneration of natural ecosystem is one of the three principles of circular economy. So it really is extremely relevant and important for a circular economy. And if you think about regenerative materials, they present advantages over a number of areas. The first one is a regenerative materials usually requires a lot less like chemicals to grow. And so it will kind of protect the soil a lot more and will allow for that soil to maintain a level of nutrition for the next crop that conventional exploitation wouldn't. Like there's a stat that struck me, like we've been degrading the soil on which we rely to grow our food, to grow our cotton, to grow many things very, very quickly over the past like 50 to 60 years. And today we have more or less permanently degraded a third of the soil that is available to us to grow stuff. And that soil will take like 1,000 years to regenerate and get back to a level at which it's exploited. There's an increasing body of knowledge that shows that through regenerative practices, because you don't compact the soil as much and amongst other things, you kind of allow that soil to keep and attract carbon, which potentially can reduce the carbon emission and even like be kind of carbon negative, like attract more carbon than it releases, providing a very good mitigation for climate change.
We talk a lot in the circular economy about virgin materials versus regenerative materials. Can you just give a baseline for our listeners about what is a virgin material and what are we talking about when we talk about a virgin material?
There's virgin from conventional regenerative, to what Rebecca was saying, and there's recycled to what we've been talking about. Virgin means it's the first time the materials is being used. So it's directly coming from oil if it's polyester or nylon, or it's directly coming from a field or a goat if it's like cotton or cashmere. And if it's recycled, it means it's been taken from a product to be put back into a new product.
And then I want to just hit on something that people might know, but really surprised me when I got into this, when I started getting into my own research years ago, which is that when Francois was referring to PET, PET stands for petroleum, and that is the main makeup of fabrics like polyester and nylon, which account for an enormous amount of the clothing produced. You know, we think about people pumping oil out of the ground, and we usually think about it going into our cars, but it is going into our plastics, and it is also going into our clothes. So, but I'd like to continue this conversation about regenerative materials. Let's bring on Matt Scullin. He is the CEO of MycoWorks, which is a company that grows mycelium. And you might know mycelium by its other name, which is mushrooms. Matt can demystify that for us a little bit. He's joining us from his home in California. And MycoWorks has developed a regenerative leather replacement called Made with Reishi that is made entirely from mycelium. So welcome, Matt.
Hi there. Thank you. Hi, everybody.
Matt, can you tell us about mycelium? It's really fascinating, and I can't believe that we're talking about turning it into leather. So can you talk about it and talk about what makes mycelium a regenerative material?
So at MycoWorks, we envision a future where we can grow many of the materials that we need to use instead of deriving them from petroleum-based products like you were talking about. And so mycelium is a really interesting path to doing this, because it is a very interesting material that's naturally grown, typically in forests, as you mentioned, as sort of the precursor to mushrooms. They're kind of the root structure of mushrooms. And so mycelium is a way to capture carbon from the environment. Trees suck carbon out of the environment. That's why forests are so important to our decarbonization efforts. And then they store a lot of that carbon in mycelium. So we at MycoWorks, we make this material reishi. I'm holding up a piece here. And there's another photo there. We make reishi by emulating this process in the forest, where we take sawdust, which is also known as biomass, but this waste sawdust that comes from the forest, we use that in our manufacturing to grow these sheets of mycelium. And so we are literally taking carbon that has been extracted from the atmosphere and converting that into mycelium, which can then be used as a material in the fashion and luxury industry.
What does that mean from an impact standpoint? Can you talk about that a little bit? Because you're a replacement for leather. We hear a lot about vegan leathers, which you might want to demystify what those vegan leathers are made of, and like talk about how that's different and what the impact difference is there.
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, today we think of reishi as an additional option. You know, if you are a fashion designer, you can work with a variety of different animal leathers or the vegan leather that's on the market, like you mentioned. And the challenge with vegan leather today is that all of it on the market is a plastic product, right? So vegan leather is, you know, frankly, I think today a bit of a disingenuous term, because it is petroleum based. It is typically polyurethane or some combination of polyvinyl chloride, PVC, or polyurethane. And these are materials that, of course, don't biodegrade, end up in landfill, end up in the ocean. And so I think there's a huge need for a material that is both natural and on top of being natural, is carbon negative, is biodegradable, and has the performance, I think, most importantly, of the existing materials on the market. And that's really what we've strived for with reishi, is to create a material that is natural, non-animal, but most importantly, performs like it needs to in a variety of different applications.
So like, talk to me about performance. How strong is it? I can't even imagine. Like, what kind of applications can you use a mushroom leather for?
Yeah, so our process, you know, we create something that is extremely strong here using a technology that we call fine mycelium. So we actually don't refer to this as a mushroom leather. We make it very differently from some of the other mushroom leathers that maybe you've heard about in the past. In our fine mycelium process, we sort of coerce the cells of the mycelium to grow into this interwoven structure. And when they take on this interwoven structure, they become very, very strong, like the skin that we have, or what you'd find in leather, of course. And so it can be used in a variety of different applications in fashion and luxury. You know, we've had it tested, or we've had customers building prototypes now for a while in applications ranging from footwear to handbags to ready to wear. And we're also really proud to have published third-party test data on our website. So on madewithreishi.com, you can go and download PDFs that sort of show the whole gamut of leather testing that's been performed on our material. And it performs like cowhide, which is pretty amazing.
Let's go from here. Let's bring everybody back and let's start answering some questions. Francois, first one is for you. Can you talk about the water use for organic cotton? They think it might use more water than conventional cotton?
Yeah, I think that's a very good question. So there's very statistics about like the water use by organic cotton, but the main criteria that we applied when we looked at different sources of cotton was very much around like the more like pollution impact that it had, and organic cotton not using pesticides and fertilizers was our key thing. But there are like conversations about like, does it or does it not? And actually we had many conversations about like, does it require more water than conventional cotton? And we couldn't find like a satisfying answer proving it one way or the other.
And I've heard that it has a lot to do with where it's grown as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
To be, whether it's rain fed or irrigated. Thank you for that. So Rebecca, when you're looking at a denim fiber, is there a maximum level of recycled to virgin content that is required to make jeans? You mentioned that your holiday collection was 5% recycled cotton. Is that where you started, or was there a viability reason for that?
Right, that's the starting point, because 5% was cost neutral to us, as well as enabled us to maintain our physical quality testing standards. When you increase the amount of, it is possible to increase the amount of post-consumer waste cotton in denim, but it does have an impact on price, and it has an impact on the strength of the fabric. We are, though, not stopping at 5%. We are currently working on developing products that have a higher percentage of recycled cotton in them.
Stuart, for you, can you talk about some of the replacement materials that Thousand Fell used for leather and other components in your shoes? Are there one or two you can tell us about?
Yeah, we can. So we use for our leather a leather substitute, and Matt sort of touched on this. We use RPET as sort of the base leather of it. It's a woven. It allows us to recycle it, and then we've used a waterborne kind of resin finish on top that gives it that leather hand feel. We actually tested out using cotton as a base, so being able to kind of walk away from plastics. There was an issue with durability there, though. So it was separating, and we can get into like the nitty gritty of like lasting and outsole stitching and cupsole manufacturing later. But needless to say, like after a lot of testing, that's kind of where we landed. With some of the other component parts, our goal was, and Francois touched on this, was to pull out all of those virgin materials, like virgin plastics that we could, and move towards renewables. We use a lot of coconut husk, sugarcane, palm tree leaf, and that's kind of food waste or component parts coming from the food waste industry, and substituting those with our footboards and our heel caps and toe caps. So we can actually pull those materials out and industrially compost them in about 30 to 60 days and actually yield kind of like good fertilizer after it. Which is kind of a nuanced point when it comes to industrially composting.
We just got something come in through the Q&A that thinks that you and Matt, you should be working with Thousand Fell and creating a collaboration. So if that happens, we all get to say we were here for the first meeting.
In the inception. We're always looking for new materials. We haven't found the perfect suite, and as material innovation picks up, like our goal at Thousand Fell is to continue to build that material library and add new materials.
Matt, can you talk to us about dyeing and tanning made with reishi leather? We're getting a couple of questions about that. This is probably from people who understand the way that leather is typically tanned, which is with a metal called chromium, which is very polluting. It's pretty toxic and it's pretty nasty. And a lot of companies are putting a lot of money into trying to get that out of their tanning process. So Matt, can you talk to us about how reishi is tanned, dyed?
Yeah, that's great. I think this is an area that, first of all, we put a lot of effort into. And the big challenges in tanning an animal is that you go through two really nasty steps. First, you go through what's called the beam house operation, where you have to remove all of the hair and the fat and put it through some really caustic chemicals. And then you put it through the tanning, where, like you mentioned, you use typically some sort of metal like chromium to do the tannage, and then incorporate the dyes. So mycelium, being a fundamentally different material than skin, which is mostly comprised of collagen, we don't have to do either of those steps. We have one very simple tannage step that does not depend on a chromium or any sort of metal, salt, or chemistry. And instead, we can use and have been using either the very traditional veg tanning methods, but with very light water use, or some of the really high-tech greener tannages that are just beginning to hit the market in the tanning industry. And so dyeing is another area where we're making progress towards using greener dyes. And fortunately, because it is not a collagen-based material, we can use a much wider variety of different types of dyes. So the overall chemistry that we're using is far greener than what is used for animal tannage. And I think we're still in an area where there's a lot to be innovated there, and we have several partnerships that we're exploring that way that are really exciting.
One more question for you that's come up about 16 times, which is, does your mycelium leather biodegrade or can it be recycled? What's the, when we're talking about a circular economy, what's the end of life for a made with reishi product?
Yeah. So it can biodegrade, like mycelium in the forest, if kept under the right conditions, it's a natural material that can go back into the earth. So, it's really an incredibly circular process that we have, because we're starting with waste, we're converting it into mycelium, and then mycelium can then go back into the ground and help to actually improve crop yield in some instances. It's been shown to be something that when you add it to fertilizer can help to improve the speed of crop growth, because it helps in the delignification of wood. And so it's really a fascinating material in terms of its circularity, and something that we're excited to share more of the science behind as we move forward and publish more data to our website.
So Francois, we don't have too much time left, so I want to ask you this question that has come up a couple of times, which is, for smaller companies and people who are just starting out, maybe people who are launching brands, they want to interact with the circular economy, they want to create circular businesses. What should new and small businesses prioritize? If they're going to start somewhere, where do they start? That's
a very, very good question. And I think it really depends on what you want to achieve, right? I think really understanding what you want to achieve and thinking about how you want people to interact with your product is a great starting point. And then based on how people will interact with your product, will you provide something that they should keep forever? In which case it would define a different system. Will you provide something that's fundamentally trendy, where you need another system? And based on that, you can then make decision on what's the right business model, what's the right product conception, what are the right partners that you need to have in order to achieve that. But I think starting from what do you want to achieve with your product? What's the ecosystem you need around it? And then work your way around that.
Yeah, I also like how Ellen always talks about, when you start thinking about something, think about the end of its life first. Think about where it needs to end up first, which I think is, it's a really interesting way to design. I think we've got time for a few more questions. Does anybody have, from any of you, we've been talking a lot about sharing good information, and you guys have all given a lot of great information. Any recommendations for online publications, blogs, podcasts, specific journalists who are doing a great job of communicating accurate information? I personally love the New Standard Institute. Their whole philosophy is around debunking bad sustainability myths and putting good ones out there as a resource for journalists and consumers. Anybody else have something that they go to? Not to put everybody on the spot. You know what? I will ask our panelists, and I will post something. We'll make sure we post some good links for everybody afterward. What about, can everybody just give a minute about how COVID is affecting your businesses? Stuart, maybe you want to go first. You just launched at the end of last year.
COVID's been interesting. So for us, we believe and still kind of do that in-person retail is kind of a big next step for brands that are going circular. And there's a couple different reasons there. One, the messaging of the circular economy is nuanced, and we've taken an hour to explain it to everybody. So getting that messaging across in a 10-second Instagram ad is very difficult. So being able to bring people offline is important. And then kind of the mechanics of recollecting product becomes much more environmentally and also economically affordable when you do it in person. So that was a big strategy of ours. Obviously, we're having to kind of walk away from that for the time being and really focus on digital and how we're bringing education on the circular economy online, how we're allowing customers to interact with product online. And so that's really been the big focus. It's been a regroup around what does a digital only next 6, 8, 10 months look like while we kind of traverse what's happening with COVID.
What about you, Rebecca? Has this affected any of your supply chain or Has COVID slowed you down at all?
Well, having all of our stores closed, that's having a tremendous impact on the business. My job, I work a year and a half ahead of today. So I am busy working on spring of 2021 and starting fall of 2021. And so I would say that the impact for my role is to, the challenge of staying in touch with our suppliers. What are they doing? Who's open? Who's closed? What do they, what are they working on that's new? But overall, the momentum that the Gap has been building towards sustainability and circularity is continuing on into 2021. Like I said earlier, it's now a normal part of our conversations with our suppliers. And we are continuing to build that momentum and work on products for next year that put sustainability and circularity at the forefront.
That's awesome. Matt, what about you? I know you've got some partnerships you guys are set to announce soon. And how is COVID affecting you? Is it affecting when you'll be in market?
Yeah, so I think, the situation, like other situations that are similar to this that we've gone through in the past, like in 2008, are really opportunities for focus. And we're finding that all of our partners across the board are focusing on sustainability. So it's really heartening to see that is remaining a priority, I think, across the fashion industry. I think for a lot of the reasons that we talked about here, it often makes good economic sense for the companies to think about the efficiencies associated with sustainability, in addition to just sort of where the market is headed. So yeah, I mean, look, we're subject to some of the delays like everybody right now, but we're feeling pretty good about the future and about Made with Reishi having a big impact.
Well, and all three of you are doing this from your homes, which is really incredible. And I am so bummed to say we have to stop now because we are out of time. We have enough questions that we could have gone another 2 hours, I think. But we will continue answering those questions and sharing them with everybody who joined today. If you follow us on This Is Now Live on Instagram, we're going to continue these conversations and continue to give you answers to some of these questions. Please feel free to hit us up on there. Also, everyone here will be invited to a private LinkedIn group where we will again be sharing good information. Again, this is also our first time doing this. So thank you so much for being here. I want to thank all of our panelists and all of our participants, all of you for being here. I also want to thank the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, my friend Francois, for giving us such good information and such a good overview. And I want to thank the amazing team at BPCM who put this all together from their apartments. And I hope you all stay safe and healthy. And I hope to see you all the next time we gather. Thank you so much.